Why should you care about pollinators? The simple truth, we can't live without them. Bees, butterflies, birds, bats, beetles, and other small mammals that pollinate plants are responsible for creating 1 out of every 3 bites of food. They also sustain a healthy ecosystem. 75% of all flowering plants on Earth are pollinated by insects and animals. And of course, pollinators play a huge role in maintaining our economy. In the United States alone, pollination by honeybees contributes over $19 billion annually to crop production. Sadly, pollinators are under threat. Their habitats have declined for a number of reasons, including urban development and intensive agriculture. This means fewer areas for flowering plants to provide the food bees need and other pollinators to survive. Today, we are thankful to have 3 local pollinator experts. They're here to share their knowledge about these important creatures, as well as personal actions and community initiatives to get involved to support healthy pollinators. Would you please join me in welcoming Bryan Bishop from Concordia College, Peter Schultz from the Longspur Prairie Fund, and Netha Cloeter from the Plains Art Museum.
Thank you so much for having me here. And just briefly, just a little bit about myself. You could say that I've been interested in insects for as long as I can remember. My sister, when I was 6 years old, my sister told me that I was going to grow up and be a bug doctor. She was correct. I started raising honeybees when I was 12 years old, so I guess I've always had a fascination with insects. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them and about some of the plants that they pollinate. First off, and I'm just going to talk about insects. So there are other animals that pollinate, but there's 4 main groups of insects that pollinate. There's our butterflies and moths, the Lepidoptera, the flies, Diptera, the beetles, Coleoptera, and then of course the bees in the Hymenoptera. So those are the 4 main groups that pollinate. And flowers themselves are also broken down into 2 broad categories. Whoops, get that up there. The first group is what we would call our open house flowers. And these are flowers where the rewards, the pollen, the nectar, are very easily accessible to the insect. And then we have what are called closed house flowers. And those are ones where the rewards are either more deeply recessed or just outright hidden, such as in this lupine. The pollen, the nectar are all hidden within the petals. So given those characteristics then, these affect who pollinates, who visits these flowers. Now open house is open to everybody. Any of those 4 groups I mentioned earlier can visit these, but they're particularly important for the beetles and flies. You could sort of think of beetles and flies as not being the brightest insects out there. And so they need everything out there easily available to them so they can find it. And so when they visit these, they either feed on the pollen or the nectar or both there. And then in the closed house flowers, they can't figure these flowers out, or they don't have the appropriate structures to visit them. So in the bottom there, we have tubular flowers. Those are very important for the Lepidoptera. So they have a long proboscis, so they can reach down deep into the flower to get to the nectar. And then on top there, you have the bees and flowers that they really like. The mints, bees, I like to say, are not afraid to stick their heads in places that other insects would not dare go. So they'll do that. But then they also can even figure out how to work these pea flowers. And so they can figure out how to move the petals apart, how to get access to the pollen and to the nectar. Now, speaking of bees, most people do not realize how many types of bees there are out there. As you can see, there's about 20,000 species that we've described so far. And even in the US, we have near 4,000 species, US and Canada, I should say. But even in Minnesota, these are the latest updates I've gotten from the DNR bee survey. We have more bees in Minnesota than there are bird species in Minnesota. And so people just don't realize just how many different kinds of bees there are. Most people think honeybee, and that's it. And these bees range in size from little sweat bees like the agacorella on the tip of my finger there, very tiny little bees, to the larger bumblebees that we get in our areas. And one thing I want to mention about bumblebees is early in the season, in the spring and early summer, any bumblebee you see flying will probably be a queen, because she's the only one that overwinters. And so she will be starting a new colony of bumblebees. And so if she doesn't make it, that means that whole next generation is gone. So it's very critical that she survives. The other thing about bees I like to say is that they are extreme pollinators. Most people recognize that bees tend to be fuzzy, hairy, and those hairs play an important role. They actually pick up a static charge as the bee is flying through the air, so the pollen actually clings to them, and so they can then carry that with them. The other thing, like I said, is they're so, you could say, in love with flowers, that some bees will actually sleep in the flowers. That's a male leafcutter bee, and he's in there sleeping in the flower for the evening. So they're really adapted for flowers. Now, if you're thinking of trying to put habitat out for bees and other pollinators, there's a few things to keep in mind. One thing, they're going all through the season. Osmia bees have emerged already. They've been out for a few weeks. They're going to be disappearing. The other bees will be coming out, as well as other pollinators. So you need plants blooming, and hopefully a variety of plants throughout the season. So that's very important. And that can include some things that a lot of people think of as weeds. Dandelions are very critical. They're one of the earlier blooming plants, and so we really need those to be out there for those earlier insects. One of the things people don't think about, though, is nesting sites. Most bees, 70% of them, nest actually in the ground. They dig holes, people see them and they think they're maybe ant hills or something, but they're actually bees. Bees and mulch do not mix together. If you mulch your whole garden, bees cannot nest in it. So it's nice to leave bare areas, bare patches without any mulch on it, so that they can then nest down in there. Other bees nest in stems, and you can put boxes out. This is in my backyard, and there's actually, you can barely see them. There's 2 osmia bees that are flying into the box at that time. But they also nest, like I said, in stems. And you can, if you have things like raspberries and pithy stems, you want to leave those. You don't want to cut them in the fall and throw them away, because there might be bees inside of there that are going to become adults the next season. So when you cut them, leave them. You can put them on the ground, leave them. You can cut them in the spring and just leave them. Leave them till about this time of year, and that gives those bees a chance to emerge and start the next generation. So, thank you, and I'm going to pass this on to Netha now.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Netha Cloeter. I work at Plains Art Museum in Fargo. And you might be wondering, why is an art museum presenting on pollinators? Which is a fair question. So art museums typically have collections that we manage, and insects can do quite a bit of damage to those collections. But as an art museum that's really education forward and engaged with the public, we are committed to creating more resilient and welcoming communities. And that is for all citizens, including our pollinator friends. We're also integrated with pollinators, and systems like food systems in our ecosystem depend on each other. So improving the lives of pollinators also improves the lives of all members of our community. So to this end, Plains Art Museum has a pollinator garden on our campus in downtown Fargo. And a big part of this project is our Buzz Lab internship program, which is a teen internship that happens over the course of the summer. It's paid for students ages 12 to 18. And each summer, the interns, they engage in learning, teaching, creating, sustaining, and advocating for the livelihood of pollinators in a healthy ecosystem. So I'm going to talk about that program today, but I'm going to start with a little bit about the pollinator garden. So the Pollinator Garden is one of 2 Defiant Garden projects for Fargo-Moorhead that the museum manages. And this was an initiative started by our former director and CEO, Colleen Sheehy. The Pollinator Garden was designed by artist Chris Baumler. She is based in the Twin Cities and affiliated with the University of Minnesota. And it's a sustainable redesign of the Plains Art Museum's urban campus. So it includes planted annuals and perennials. So in this photo, you can see some pollinator-friendly perennials like purple prairie coneflower, blazing star, Joe Pye weed, Russian sage I see there as well. It's herbicide and pesticide free, and it also has stormwater abatement features that clean the water that goes back into our drainage system, and then we're also capturing that water through a large cistern that we have hooked up to a neighboring apartment complex. And then there's also a fruit tree orchard. When Chris Baumler proposed this project back in 2009, she did several site visits throughout our community and really noted the lack of pollinator-friendly spaces, as well as an abundance of turf grass at a lot of our local parks, and an abundance of concrete in a lot of our built environment. So I think this has improved since 2009, but I think we can all agree that we could use more pollinator-friendly spaces throughout our community. So a little bit about Buzz Lab. Chris really saw youth engagement as an integral component of this work. And at Plains Art Museum, we really believe that to enact systemic change, we need to focus on the next generation. So this is one of the reasons that we have education at the heart of everything that we do. Since 2014, when our first cohort of interns met, it must be automatically advancing here. We have engaged over 80 students, ages 12 to 18, and each summer we've curated an independent and unique program that is all of these different values or bullet points that we have listed here. And there are 2 things that I want to highlight. One is that it's a paid internship, so the interns get $30 a day for the work that they're doing. And we see educating the community, taking care of gardens, learning so that they can better their community, all as part of that work. It's grant supported, which is one way that we're able to do that. And it's also reflective of the diverse backgrounds and perspectives that encompass our community. So we really value diversity of perspective when we're going through our applications each year. One aspect of the program that I really want to highlight this morning is community engagement. So this independent and unique program that we curate each year always has some type of project at the center of it. So the project can be going out into the community in some way. It can be something we design in-house, but share through some sort of method that gets the word out. For example, this summer, we are going to be focusing on building a float for the canoe parade that happens in September. But in the past, we've done a couple of different things. So the Swarm for Change posters that we made, that was in relation to a campaign that we had throughout Fargo-Moorhead, where we were trying to get our local leaders to sign Bee City USA proclamations. We also have testified in front of some different city commissions. We've had a rally for the bees, that's in the bottom left, where our interns gave stump speeches, and we invited members of the community to come. And then we've also built a mobile hive that's popped up at different places throughout the community. This community engagement piece has both educated the wider community, but it's also given our interns confidence that they have a voice in our community. So I'll quote one of our veteran interns, just to bring the Buzz Lab voice in the room here. She says, "I would like to help teach others that no matter how small their voice seems, that they can be heard and they can make a difference, just as Buzz Lab has taught me." So in closing, one more thing. I do want to say that this is a youth engagement project, and I think several projects that put youth at the center, often it's in a superficial way maybe, like it's entertainment or something to do during the summer. And I really believe that our interns have been the best colleagues in this work. They're truly passionate about sustaining pollinators and creating a better community for all of us. So, thank you.
name is Peter Schultz, and I am the Executive Director of the Longspur Prairie Fund. It's great to be here with y'all. I am going to follow up with my colleagues very briefly on some things that LPF is doing in town to maximize habitat for pollinators, and that is our microprairie program. This project began in many ways about 10 years ago, and it was a direct response to a surreal fact that I had not known at that moment, which was the amount of lawn that exists in America. Now, I know that most of you guys here, you're all food activists, you get it already, but just to keep this in mind, there is more lawn in the US than there is farmland planted with corn and soybean. Now, I know that seems bizarre. It is true, those numbers fluctuate a lot, so it's always moving up and down. But what it does sort of prompt is in addition to sort of wonder, is the idea that individual homeowners and property owners can have an active role in rolling back some of the habitat crisis that we have sort of inflicted upon our landscapes. This is exciting for a number of reasons, but perhaps the most important one is that right now if you have a lawn or have access even to a small patch of grass, can actively be involved in reestablishing pollinator habitat, which is what the microprairie program is all about. Okay, super. Right, so how does this go about working? Well, it's pretty basic. The first step is seed prep, and there's going to be a punchline for all of this at the end, so wait for that too. The seed for all of these things are coming from pre-existing prairie remnants or from pre-existing microprairies, which is to say that you don't have to pay for that seed. Part of the idea of the microprairie project is that it is not only a sustainable way to manage your lawn and to provide habitat, but also it self-perpetuates. So the more microprairies that are out there, the more seed reserves you have to gather to increase the number of microprairies that are out there, and so on and so forth. So once that cycle gets rolling, once in fact you're actually where we are now, where you have 3 good-sized microprairies that are up, you have enough seed at the end of every year, basically late fall, to gather that material and plant another 10 to 20 other microprairies, right? So the seed part is important. And basically what I'm doing is here, I'm sitting at my really dodgy kitchen table, pulling the seed out, getting ready to put it in. And all these picks are from my own front yard. Next, ground prep. This used to be a vegetable garden, again, right out in front of my place. We just pulled all the food out and combed it down and installed the seed. The seed went in on bare earth, and then a mat rolled over it, and that was it. That was the installation of the microprairie. Sown seed, of course, late fall, next spring, voila, you have your prairie. It's ready to go. And of course, it's really exciting. My neighbors were a little bit skeptical, I suppose, at the beginning of what this was really looking like, but of course now they love it. They think it's beautiful, and of course the bees love it too. Perhaps the most exciting part about that is, again, that replicability. Once you get going, the seed can be used elsewhere, and you just keep on doing it. The really exciting thing about that, however, is the price. The total install for this microprairie hovered right around $40, right? And most of that went into the coconut mat we put down over the dirt. So what that means is that you can install the microprairie, in this case you're probably talking about a 15 by 15 foot space, for the cost of one plant, right? Which will then generate even more seed and prairie, as we talked about. Now, in terms of concrete benefits, there are aesthetics, there is a little bit of water retention going on, most importantly there's habitat, and that piece was for me perhaps the most important, but it wasn't the most important when we started this. When we originally started the microprairie program, the idea was really one of public education. I mean, as Netha and Bryan have pointing out sort of drawing attention to the plight of our pollinator habitat is important. Raising public awareness is key. I mean, without Silent Spring and Rachel Carson, we never would have had a DDT ban, for example, so getting the word out about this matters. And that's what this project was originally about. It was about raising awareness. Cool, it's sort of like a living billboard. You have these microprairies around, everybody thinks they're neat, they're beautiful, there's bees buzzing all over the place. It looks good, it feels good, it's a way of getting our brand out there. However, as things continue to roll forward and we begin to see how many animals are actually using these sites, the sort of PR aspect of this sort of fell by the wayside, and what we realized was that this microhabitat is actually habitat, right? When you walk down my driveway and you look to the north, it is alive with life. It's buzzing, literally. To the left, to the south, is my neighbor. It's just basically, it's sod, right? It's a sponge for pesticides and herbicides. There's nothing living there. So what began as an interesting outreach kind of project has kind of morphed into sort of the core of our mission, which is creating habitat to sustain these animals that are so critical to our lives. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for that wonderful information, those presentations, beautiful pictures, lots of great information. So now we're at the portion of First Fridays where you can ask these wonderful presenters questions. So if there's things that they brought up that you're curious to know more about, or if you have an idea for something that might support some of these current initiatives or projects in the community, we would love to hear about that now. So we can start with Caroline.
This question is for Peter. Hello, good to see you. With these plants and these seeds, are they mostly full sun plants, or can there be adaptation for shade? I've got a lot of shade.
Sure, that's a great question. Did everybody hear Caroline's question?
If you want to repeat it, that'd be
Right,
great.
basically we had where can these things be planted? Is there a kind of an adaptation where you can use shade plants for these? All of the stuff that we're pulling mostly needs direct sun, because they're native genomes from this area, and prairie plants, like that direct sunlight. But we are having conversations with the folks at Hollins, actually, about how we can sort of morph this to suit all kinds of different yards. There are flowering plants that do very well in the shade, obviously, and anything that has nectar is a potential source of food and of habitat. So I wish I had a more definitive answer for you, Caroline, right now, but it is sort of in development. As it stands right now, they're prairie plantings exclusively, but it can't stay like that, and we're actually thinking about ways that we can sort of get involved with individual property owners to build not seed mixes, but plant mixes that are specific for their yards, and then maybe not be actively involved in putting in, but somehow compensating them for doing that work. So the idea would be, if you have a spot and you want to do this, if you put it in, you'd give us your receipts and we would pay you for that, or at least in some capacity. The most important thing, right, is just to get the lawn gone and get more food on it. So that would be a solution. I hope I'm answering.
Awesome. Deb.
So if we are wanting to be able to help the bees and the butterflies, what kinds of plants that are already started do you recommend that people buy so that we know that they're not bringing in pesticides or herbicides or such?
Okay, so the question was, what kind of plants should you be buying for pollinators that aren't bringing in pesticides, etc.? That's a good question. I don't know if people had seen the study that came out just a few years ago. They looked at a lot of the pollinator plants that were in big box stores, and they found they were being treated with neonicotinoids, which are not good for bees and other pollinators. And so a number of the stores have made commitments to not use those anymore, but some, I know Lowe's, they said, hey, we're going to keep using it. So you really want to check with your supplier if those have neonics treated or not, because you can't wash that off. It's systemic in the plant. So that's just asking the people. If they don't know, they're like, I don't know, don't buy it there. Find the place that does know. But the other thing too, as far as plants, you want to avoid, as one of my advisors called them, the mutant plants. And those are plants that have double flowers, so we've turned the pollen producing parts into petals. So think of a rose that you can buy in the store that's totally unnatural. It would never survive in the wild. All the pollen has been turned into petals, so there's none there for bees or other insects. So you only want single floral. If you see wild roses, they only have a single row of petals. So those are the types of flowers that you want. Avoid those double flowers.
A follow-up, or did you want to add a little more on that?
Well, you could also plant from seed, and I will offer the Pollinator Garden as a place where you could harvest. I'm sure the Micro Prairie Project as well.
So those spaces that you currently have, people are free to go into those and harvest seed for themselves, and that is the pre-existing prairie remnants. I had to write that down, that are in those spaces.
Yeah, so there's a couple of aspects to that. Any of LPF's big prairie sites, if you all want to go out there and grab seed, awesome. There is more seed out there, both forbs and grass, than we could ever use in the FM area. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of acres, right? With regards to the micro prairies, since those are held on private property, the best course of action there is just going to be knock on the door and say, hey, can I get some of your seed? And I always say yes. And the other big one is at the Rourke Art Museum, and then Dwight Mickelson has a big one at his place too. And if this is something that you're interested in, you can also reach out to me directly, and we can get you in contact with those property owners. Of course, as this network grows, as more properties get these microprairies installed, more seed will be available, and then you have little networks where you don't have to ask anybody. You just, hey, it's my neighbor. I'm gonna go get some prairie clone flower this year and stick it in, and then you're ready to go.
Awesome, thank you. Ashley?
I'm wondering if the Longspur Prairie Fund or anybody has worked with the cities, and especially in Moorhead, because I live in Moorhead, and I'm surrounded by buyout properties that is flat and in the sun and grass, and then sprayed for dandelions, which they will call, to their credit, if you call them and say nice things, they will stop spraying the dandelions. But yeah, I think it's great that homeowners can do their part, but I wonder about the combination of the city leading by example and then just the major impact that big public spaces could be having, especially as they're putting up this bike path along the river, there's tons of sun. Has there been any collaboration with the city?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I wish that Marshall Johnson, the ED of Audubon, Dakota, was here. Marshall's Urban Woods and Prairie Initiative directly addresses that specific concern, and is a kind of a flagship program for addressing these buyout spaces in a way that is friendly for pollinators and for humans, right? Now, if you guys don't know about this, it's a triumph, right? Where Marshall has enrolled just over 2,000 acres inside the FM city limits in urban woods and prairies. Now that used to be just grass that was mowed and sprayed and whatnot, former properties that were bought. They are now fully functioning ecosystems. So yes, it's happening. It's happening on both sides of the river, both in Fargo and in Moorhead, and it really is just a matter of time. They're always adding sites. Marshall is now managing what is one of the largest urban prairie developments in North America. And it's happening here, right? So, if you know a cynic in your life, you can point them to that project because it's happening. And over time, his vision is that in 20 years, none of that will be mowed or sprayed. It will all be prairie. So the answer is a resounding yes. It is on like crazy, and they're not stopping.
Thank you. Carson?
Do you have any advice for someone who lives in newer development where it's all just lawn, in dealing with your neighbors if you wanted to install this, what kind of frequently asked questions or handling that neighbor relations, explaining to them what you're doing when you put prairie in?
Sure. Right. So the question was, what do you do with your neighbors in recently added suburbia, right, where you've got really nice lawns that have been installed and whatnot? What we found is that the easiest thing to do is to create a border, right? The moment it looks intentional, all the issues go away. It's when you have this giant sort of plot of crazy that people start to get agitated. But if there's even a little tiny rock wall around there, it's like, oh, very nice planting, like saying that you're good. So that is the number one. That's a silver bullet for all of this. So the moment you have intentionality clearly communicated by space design, you're golden. If you don't have that, you're doomed because they are going to hate it. It's going to look like a weed patch for the first several months, and that doesn't go away in the spring, right? And there's all kinds of weird bugs around it too. What's that all about? But again, the moment you have a border, you're good. That's what I would say.
So In follow-up to creating these habitats in the community, there's also discussion, and it was mentioned with the Cass Clay Food Partners, about allowing for urban beekeeping, so people can have hives in their backyard. Would that do anything significant to generally support the health of pollinators, or is that just more individual freedom? I want to have honey produced in my backyard.
Yeah, keeping honeybees, that's great. I kept honeybees, but they are not our native pollinators. These are European honeybees, and so it doesn't do anything to help pollinators in general, keeping them. Unfortunately, it also can take quite a bit of work now because of the various diseases and mites, etc., that attack honeybees. It is doable, but it can be a challenge too if you don't really know what you're doing. So keeping honeybees, that's great. They may compete against other bees, but we've also found out that native bees are more friendly with other bees. Honeybees are a little bit xenophobic, and if another bee lands there, they fly away. So native bees help honeybees become better pollinators by visiting more flowers, because they don't want to be on a flower with some other bee there. So, but it's up to you if you want to keep them or not.
Well, I don't think it's allowed right now in our city,
Correct.
so it's not up to you, actually.
So one thing that is allowed, you could create a nesting box for nesting bees, and there's a lot of DIYs for those. I know you can buy the ones that have like bamboo in the store. I don't know how effective those are. I've actually heard that there's some other ways to design them that are more effective.
That one photo, that's from my backyard, and those are really nice to put out, and you get bees using them and stuff. The one downside about them is that in the wild, they don't normally nest like that, where they're all in these big clusters. And unfortunately, parasitoids, little tiny wasps that will attack them, have found these to be a haven, unfortunately. So you have to take other measures. Like you didn't see it in the photo, I have a parasitoid trap in that box to try to keep the parasitoids from getting to the bees, or at least cut down on that. So that is one concern about those.
Robin.
For Brian, how can I tell the difference between an anthill and a bee's nest in the ground? I have a lot of those in the cracks in my patio, and I don't know what they are.
So how do you tell the difference between an anthill and a bee mound? And not being flippant here, but are there ants? If there's ant activity, then you've got ants. You won't see the bee, she's gonna be out foraging. Most bees are solitary, so she's gonna be out foraging, and so she just appears every once in a while bringing food back to the nest.
Well, they kind of look like the ones in your picture, and they're around my patio by my pollinator garden, so I'll just assume they're bee.
Yeah, if you don't see ant activity in it,
Oh,
then there's a good chance it could be a bee.
probably bees.
But it would just take some sitting there and watching.
I could do that.
So we've been talking a lot about the urban environment and things that can be done here, and I've heard some about larger scale farmers who are doing strips of pollinator habitat along the fields. Is that effective and doing anything, or is it more of a feel good for that type of agriculture?
And I know Noreen Thomas was in here. I don't know if she's still in here. Noreen, are you in here? I know she had to slip out early. I worked with her a few years ago. She put in a strip like that, but she did it for using teas like chamomile and stuff, so there was another benefit to it. The problem is with Roundup Ready crops and stuff, farmers have gone right up to the very edge and sprayed everything. And in the past, we used to have those strips there. And while they're not the panacea to solve all the problems, they certainly help. So having those strips not only helps the pollinators, but also natural enemies. And so they can help protect the crops too, as long as they're not out there spraying them to death. But yeah, so having those strips, I mean, every little bit helps. I'll put it that way.
Mike.
You're seeing more and more solar panels, farms, especially in Minnesota with community solar. Looks like there's 200 megawatts that's going out by Castleton, and part of the public
I am not. I don't know if anybody else is doing anything with that, but you're right. I mean, the concern is anything getting higher than the solar panels, obviously, that cuts down on the energy produced. But I think it's a mentality that has to change. We had pollinator gardens at Concordia a number of years ago, and unfortunately they are following Peter's earlier example of unkempt looking, and the administration hated them and kept on us about them and stuff. So when we redid the science building on the side, on 8th Street side, that's now all pollinator garden, and the reason they like it is because things are planted in rows. And so they can accept that. And so, I think there's just this mentality of the plants, that are out there. But if they were to put low-growing plants, clovers and stuff like that, that could be beneficial. But no, I'm not working with them. Yeah.
So Mike, there's a solar plant that went up in DL, I guess it was last summer, and the NRCS office in Becker County is installing a pollinator garden around that. And we've been in contact with those guys, and then with our former mayor, Del Rey, about getting together some money to perhaps initiate a similar kind of pollinator garden around the Moorhead solar plant, which would be great. One of the things that's interesting about both of those is that once you see it done effectively once, and how much more useful and beautiful and important that kind of planting is around a power station, it becomes sort of infectious, right? So it just takes one to get people excited about it, and then as that solar plant grows, then you can get more stuff in there. So I mean, from our point of view, there have been some preliminary conversations. That wouldn't go in until probably next year at the earliest, though.
Awesome. So unfortunately, we are out of time. I know that we'll have some time for networking and coffee after the program wraps up. So if you have other questions, I'm sure these guys would be happy to answer. Yes.
For anybody interested, I forgot to mention, I brought a small little box over there of our local bees, in case you're interested in seeing what some of them look like, and then 2 books that are out there that are really nice if you're just starting to learn about this. One's called Your Backyard Bees, and so it will give you all the more scientific-y information about it with wonderful photos in it. And then the other book is about the native bees, and it's written more in a story format from this woman who basically traveled around visiting everything from beekeepers to other people keeping or raising native bees for pollination, etc. And so they're both really good books.
Excellent. But we do always end every first Friday with a final question, asking what everyone in this audience can do to support. I know you've given lots of different examples today, but if there's one take-home message that you want each of us to walk away related to your work or your initiatives or just pollinators in general, if you want to share that with us. Who wants to start?
I'll go first. Well, we are always looking for volunteers to help maintain our pollinator garden, especially to keep that balance between the unkempt and, the beautification of a garden. And then I'd also say, I think there's a lot of folks here that work for different organizations. Our BuzzLab model, we're happy to share, I think really involving youth in an integral way where they're stakeholders and co-designing the work that you're doing has led to a lot of our success and has led to pushing our thinking in what this program could be. So I encourage you to think about how you might really involve youth as an integral part of what you're doing.
Get rid of your lawn.
Can I add one thing to that? So part of our garden that's not thriving, we're actually going to replant this summer with a bee-friendly grass that has been developed by a graduate student at the University of Minnesota. So it probably won't really be until next summer that we'll start having it growing, but stop by Plains Art Museum and there may be a test pilot area.
And before I give you my point, picking up on that, I still do have some lawn, but it's heavily seeded with clover, and so letting the clover, letting the dandelions, letting just all those other things bloom and do their thing is important. And speaking of U of M, the Bee Lab down there, when I was last down there, they're working on some more what you might call wildflowers that instead of coming up high, once you mow them once, they then stay low to the ground and bloom. And so they're trying to develop those so that people can put those in their lawns. My take home from the biological side is don't blame the bees for the wasps. Come August, the yellow jackets will be in full force. They're the ones who are flying around pestering you and stuff. It's not the bees. Bees are vegetarians, and so if it's trying to take your turkey sandwich, it's not a bee. They're not interested. So let people know those are yellow jackets. They are not bees.
Don't blame the bees.
Don't blame the bees.
Would you all please join me in thanking these guys?